Now at this time we do have our final candidate coming to the stage, and that is Anthony Brown. Now, Lieutenant Governor Brown was born in Huntington, New York, and he received his undergraduate degree and his law degree from Harvard. As a practicing lawyer, Brown worked for Wilmer Cutler Pickering, which the people who have done OCI here now know as Wilmer Hell, and Gibbs and Haller as well. He also currently serves as a colonel in the Army Reserves. Please join me in welcoming Anthony Brown.
Thank you, Dean Haddon, and the members of the faculty and students and administrators here at our fine law school. Thank you for hosting this evening's forum. Benjamin, thank you for your brief and kind introduction. How's everyone doing this evening? Is my clock running?
You're in your 2 minutes.
I'm in my 2 minutes. Okay, well, look. And I'll be brief. 30 years ago, and I'm not going to take you year by year through those 30 years, but I graduated from college and I put on a uniform to serve in our nation's military. I was a second lieutenant in the United States Army and served with some of the most patriotic men and women from all four corners of this country. 19 years later, I got a set of orders to take me to Iraq. My children were young. My daughter was 9. My son was 2 weeks shy of his 4th birthday. And I looked at these orders. I thought about my family, and I also thought about my parents. I'm a first-generation American. I'm one generation removed from poverty. My father came to this nation from a poor neighborhood in Kingston, Jamaica. First in our family to get a college education. And America's been good to my family. So I knew what my responsibility was, and that was to serve in Iraq. One of the most difficult evenings of my life was sitting down with my kids and telling them that their dad was going to spend a year with the Army in the desert. And I knew they wouldn't really understand what I'd be doing or even really be able to appreciate how long a year is, particularly in the life of a 4-year-old, and that's how old my son was. But I went and I served with some dedicated men and women. And because of the courage and professionalism of the soldiers in the 3rd Infantry Division, and that's who I served with in Iraq, I made it back home to my family and our nation. And people often ask me, what lesson did you learn in Iraq? And what I learned is that no matter where you meet people, whether in Baghdad, Bethesda, Chevy Chase, Baltimore, anywhere in Maryland, Jamaica, this country, or in Iraq, people want the same things for themselves and their family. Opportunities made possible by good education. We all want to raise our family in a safe neighborhood, great schools, a clean environment, access to quality medical care. And no matter where you find people, think about your own experiences, your own travels. Everyone wants to live in a society that is just, with a justice system that is fair. That's what we fight for every day in Maryland. We've achieved a number of successes, but I'm running for governor because, like you, I believe that we can build a better Maryland and a better Maryland for more Marylanders.
Now, you mentioned some of the ways that poverty issues have hit home for you personally in your own life, and you've also been very vocal in supporting the financial well-being of the middle class. But as you well know, the working poor and the poor present distinct economic concerns of their own. So what we'd like to know is, how do you intend to protect Maryland's most vulnerable workers?
I think there are a number of things that we have done, and certainly some more things that we can do. I supported raising the minimum wage. There are many who said, hey, it's going to be difficult and tough on our economy, and particularly small businesses. But I think about that single woman, that single mom, okay? She works 40 hours a week, if she can find that much work, 52 weeks a year, $7.25 minimum wage. That's $15,080 a year. That's below the federal poverty level. And that's assuming she doesn't get sick, take off any time for her child, her parent. And we can do better, and that's why we raised the minimum wage to $10.10. I would have liked to have seen us index it to inflation, and I would have liked to have seen us to do more for the tip workers. I supported the living wage in Maryland, the only state still that has a living wage that we pay to employees of contractors with the state. That's why I support Obamacare. And there's been a lot of criticism about Obamacare and the fact that we've enrolled a lot of Marylanders in Medicaid. And people say, well, why Medicaid and not the commercial plan? Well, Medicaid, that's health insurance for the working poor. And we enrolled 263,000 Marylanders in the last 6 months in Medicaid, adding to the more than 250,000 Marylanders that we enrolled in Medicaid in the last 8 years. That's good for them and a quality of life and being able to live a more productive and healthy life. But it's also good for each and every one of us because it reduces the cost of uncompensated care in our hospitals. We have a program to eliminate and a goal to eliminate childhood hunger by 2015, the only state with that goal. Working with families living in poverty to deliver more schools in the classrooms, working with the nonprofit community and the private sector to deliver more through philanthropy to families who have food insecurity. And we're doing a lot of work to reduce childhood hunger starting in our schools. We have more families in the SNAP program, leveraging federal dollars so that fewer families in Maryland have to go to bed hungry. But the best thing that we can do, the transformational change, the generational change, is continuing to make investments in our schools, and hopefully we'll have more time to talk about that in some of the other questions. But it's education. My father beat the odds coming out of Jamaica. No Marylander should have to beat the odds, and when we invest in education, everyone has a much better opportunity and probability of success in this country.
Now, we'll certainly get to education, but I do have a quick follow-up before we do so. You mentioned minimum wage and some things that you would have liked to have seen done differently with that. You touch on an issue that we haven't gotten to yet tonight, and that's tipped workers. So, I know a lot of law students have had to work those restaurant jobs in the past. I know I've had to do it. What would you have done differently with tipped workers? How would you have treated that issue?
Sure. First of all, and I'm glad that you referenced the law students, because there's this misconception that the minimum wage worker is somehow the high school student, college student, and law student that it's drink money, it's change, and the profile of the minimum wage worker is a 33-year-old single mother. So that's why we needed to raise the minimum wage and give 450,000 Marylanders a wage, a raise, and it also puts $500 million into our economy. What I've done on the tip, there's this misperception that every tip worker works at, think of your, fine dining restaurant and is bringing home, some pretty good money in tip wage. But there are a lot of tip workers in service industries and in restaurants that don't bring home nearly what is the equivalent of $7.25 an hour. Our proposal would have increased the percentage of the minimum wage that an employer needed to pay that tip worker. But it would have also required a much more rigorous accounting between employer and employee to make sure that the employee is receiving the wage that they deserve and that the employer is paying that wage. But it was rejected by the General Assembly. But one of the things I've learned in Maryland, and Maryland is Annapolis, and Maryland is not Washington, D.C., we do find common ground. We do reach consensus. And we do come back from year after year to continue to do the work of the people. So we've raised the minimum wage. We didn't provide more relief to tip workers, and nor did we index it to inflation.
Now, I promised you we were going to get to education, and I don't want to make you wait. So we asked Delegate Mazier earlier about the oft-touted fact that Maryland is #1 in the nation, depending on the survey you look at in terms of education. And in the wealthier counties in the state, there's nobody that can contest that. But when you look at the Baltimore City school system, it's a completely different world. So what we'd like to know is, how are you going to ensure that first-in-the-nation opportunity for Baltimore City students?
Thank you. Look, Maryland has some of the best schools in the country, and yes, Education Week magazine ranks our public school system #1 5 years in a row. But our work continues until every child in Maryland, regardless of where you're raised and the family you live with, has access to a world-class education. Now, I invite you to go to, and I'll share with you some of the details, my website, anthonybrown.com. I've rolled out 14 policy proposals, 5 of them with education. I've got a plan to expand universal pre-K to every Maryland 4-year-old by the year 2018. And studies have shown that when a student is ready to start kindergarten or starts kindergarten ready to learn, their success by the time they get to 12th grade, their career options are almost unlimited. So I've got a plan for universal pre-K. Now in Baltimore City, you probably say, but Lieutenant Governor, we already have universal pre-K. In my plan, it enables Baltimore City to expand those programs to full duty centers where you have the wraparound services, whether it's meals, social services. My plan also calls for health clinics in those schools, particularly in those neighborhoods that have higher incidences of health disparities. I've got a plan for delivering more career technology education in our schools, because let's face it, 35% of the jobs that are going to be created in our economy over the next 10 years don't require a 4-year college degree. And not every student graduating our high schools is necessarily thinking about college upon graduation right away at least. We've got to provide other options. That's career technology education. When I was much younger, we called it Vote Tech. And it's given our students both a comprehensive high school education and the skills to compete, whether it's in automotive, whether it's in hospitality, whether it's in nursing. What I have done to support Baltimore City schools is to support the authorization of the $1.1 billion investment to replace or renovate 35 schools by 2018. Our students here in Baltimore City are being educated in, on average, the second oldest collection of schools in the state, and they deserve better.
Now, our next question is one that I've been excited about asking all night because it plays to the political nerd in me, and that is gerrymandering. So one of your opponents has taken a very strong stance against gerrymandering, tying it to the increased partisanship we see at the federal level. When you have very blue districts and very red districts, they don't really have to appeal to the moderate voters. So what we'd like to know is, how do you intend to take a stand on gerrymandering, and what kind of a platform would you put forward to roll back the effect of gerrymandering?
Yeah, gerrymandering is a problem, and I know there have been a lot of scholars and commentators who have spoken about the ill effects of gerrymandering. We see it in Washington, D.C. The paralysis that we have on Capitol Hill, the unwillingness to work with the executive branch, with the president, many believe, and I do as well, that it's a direct result of gerrymandering, where you have districts that are so solidly Democrat or so solidly Republican, you often, not always, but you often find candidates who are appealing to the far extremes of their party, and that's true whether it's in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, and less of a willingness to forge consensus and compromise, to find that middle ground where most Americans are. That's not compromising principles, but that's compromising in order to find that common ground. And that becomes nearly impossible, and we're seeing it in Washington because of gerrymandering. Look, I support establishing a process that is better than what we have in Maryland. I would support a bipartisan or a nonpartisan commission made up not of politicians but public servants from academia, from groups like Common Cause and the ACLU, put in a few smart law school and college professors, but a representative group of knowledgeable individuals that could come back with a plan that meets not only constitutional requirements, because the courts say that what we have in Maryland meets the constitutional requirements. Yet in Maryland, where by party registration, 1/3 Republican, 2/3 Democrat, why is it that we only have one Republican representing Maryland on Capitol Hill? It's because we have districts that might satisfy the constitutional requirement, which includes community of interest, but they look like a gerrymandered district. So I would support that commission. But with or without the commission, you do need a governor who is going to, because under current law, the governor proposes the map to the General Assembly. And it's not rocket science to draw districts that meet constitutional requirements. It only becomes difficult and complex when you have contorted-looking districts to make sure that they satisfy the constitutional requirements. So yes, I support a bipartisan or nonpartisan commission, but I also believe that that's the role of the next governor, to lead in a way that, with or without the commission, we avoid gerrymandering. And I will say, and I know that you already know this,
We're getting close to 2 minutes. Oh, I mean, you can finish your sentence.
That I believe it was Justice Stevens who's calling on a constitutional amendment, because we can fix it in Maryland, but if they don't fix it in other states, then we don't address where the ill effects of gerrymandering really play out. Because where they really play out is more in Washington and less in Annapolis. Because gerrymandering is seen at a much larger scale in congressional districts, certainly in Maryland, than in state legislative districts.
Now, you may have heard me ask Delegate George earlier, I'm not sure if you were watching in the audience or not, about recidivism and reentry of ex-offenders into society. There's always a lot of emphasis put on removing barriers to these ex-offenders, but there's often a gap where we don't talk about how can you facilitate relationships between potential employers and these reentry citizens. So I'd like for you to speak a bit about how we can facilitate a relationship between these ex-offenders and potential employers.
Sure, and there's a lot we can do. Let me just start by saying that, some of the progress points in Maryland, we have driven down crime to the lowest levels we've seen in 3 decades. It's not always a straight line, and we know here in Baltimore that particularly in homicides, we've seen some upticks during that downward decline. The good news is last month, when the most recent homicide figures shows that we're probably getting back on that downward glide path. But we've reduced crime statewide, violent crime, to the lowest levels in 3 decades, while at the same time, over the last 7 years, our inmate population is lower today than it was 7 years ago. Recidivism, the revolving door in the criminal justice system, was closer to 50% 7 years ago. Today it's closer to 40%. How do we do that? Better case management on reentry, better skills training, more substance and mental health treatment and counseling. I'm committed to continuing on that path to progress. But there are more things that we can do and that we will do in a Brown-Ullman administration. We've banned the box for state government employment. We'll ban the box for municipal and county employment. I support the SHIELD laws so that employers are not asking on the application, but will have an opportunity in an interview to explore your criminal record, but giving our ex-offenders, when they re-enter our communities and our economy, an opportunity to present themselves to employers. I've got a plan at anthonybrown.com to reduce recidivism. It includes transitional housing options. It includes a preference in state government contracting for those proposals that include our ex-offender population as part of that workforce. There are many things that we can do to support our reentry population, but it all starts with this simple principle. We need to treat these men and women not as a scourge on society, but as an extension of our community. And we need to give them the skills and the supports so that when they return to their families and our communities, they can once again be productive members of society.
Now, the audience has heard us talk a lot about fracking to this point, and the conversation's focused a bit on the health and environmental concerns that exist there. But there also is a concern that if we do allow fracking to go forward, that we keep the money in the state that industry produces. You've talked about this a bit on your website, so what we'd like to know is how you intend to keep any industry revenue from fracking actually in the state and benefiting Western Marylanders.
Thank you. First of all, let me say, while fracking is economically enticing because of what is perceived to be a real opportunity to develop this natural resource, I will only support fracking if we can do it in a way that ensures that we protect the rural character of Western Maryland, that we protect the environment, that we protect the men and women who will work in this industry, and that we can protect the interests, the financial interests of property owners and the state of Maryland in collecting on the royalties and the revenues generated by fracking. That's why I supported in our budget last year the $1.5 million to study fracking. All of those aspects, the environmental, the health, and the financial implications and issues surrounding fracking. If we are going to, and we will in an environmentally sensitive way, we'll do it in a healthy way, but if we are going to develop that natural resource of natural gas in the Marcellus Shale in Maryland, we will only do it if we ensure that Marylanders benefit from that development. And I'll end on this note, because I don't know if we're going to get to a job-creating question. But part of my plan to create jobs in Maryland is we do have to bring manufacturing back to Maryland. Manufacturing is coming back to this country. We need to ensure that Maryland gets its fair share. We will do that when we can deliver affordable and reliable energy. Maryland imports more energy than all of our neighboring states. So we need to begin generating more energy in Maryland. So natural gas may very well give us the opportunity to do that, but again, it's got to be an environmentally sensitive, healthy way that protects the interests of Maryland property owners and the state of Maryland.
So just to clarify for the audience, could you talk about what kind of a program would keep that revenue here in the state?
That's why we've got the study.
Okay. Well, our next question is going to look at the Maryland Health Exchange. I know it's something that's very personal. You've talked about this quite a bit over the last few months. So what we'd like to know is, as governor, how would you make sure that this program's been successful?
Sure. You know, I've been involved in healthcare for quite some time. And over the last 8 years, the O'Malley-Brown administration, we've expanded access to healthcare to over 500,000 Marylanders. And when we set out to implement Obamacare, and we launched our website with technical challenges no different than what the president faced when he launched the federal website, we took action. And I can tell you that I sincerely regret that any Marylander was inconvenienced or couldn't access the services through the website. And nobody was more frustrated than I was. And that's why we took the action that we did. We reorganized leadership at the exchange. We refocused our vendors and fired those who did not perform per our contracts with them. And we evaluated our resource and capabilities, which resulted in plussing up staff at call centers and among navigators around the state. And the result? During that 6-month period, we enrolled 329,000 Marylanders. Now that's 329,000 Marylanders who today, they and their family have access to the health care that they need. Seniors are no longer making the choice between groceries and prescription drugs. Women are not paying more for health care or health insurance because they're women. Families who couldn't afford health care because they had a child or a family member with a pre-existing condition can now find affordable, quality product. Marylanders want leaders that are going to do the hard work, even when faced with challenges and difficult problems. They don't want political gamesmanship by those standing on the side, criticizing and critiquing. So what are we going to do to ensure that November's open enrollment is seamless for Marylanders? Well, we are in the process today of adopting technology developed by Connecticut. Connecticut and Kentucky had successful rollouts. The common denominator, they chose Deloitte, Maryland chose IBM. Lessons learned. But we're going to adopt that technology. We're well underway in doing that. We are confident that not only will we meet our numbers in November, but we'll do it in a way where Marylanders have a much more friendly experience on the website.
Now, just as a quick follow-up, one of the critiques has been that perhaps there hasn't been adequate responsibility taken for the rollout. Do you feel that responsibility ultimately sits with you, or do you think that's an unfair criticism?
No, look, this is when you serve in offices like this, I mean, you're going to be criticized and critiqued. And as I've said, everyone who had a role in establishing the health benefits exchange has a responsibility. That includes me. And that's why in October, when I was sharing the frustration of countless Marylanders, I stepped up and we reorganized the leadership at the exchange. We held our vendors accountable and fired those that didn't perform. We plussed up the call centers and the navigators, and as a result, even with a failed website, the Health Benefits Exchange, which is more than a website, connected 329,000 of our neighbors, many of whom have never had access to health insurance before, to quality, affordable health care. Look, I grew up in a home where my father was a family doctor. I watched him do evening house calls, weekend hospital rounds. He had a medical office in a poor neighborhood near where we grew up. And he provided health care to our neighbors in our community, many of whom couldn't afford his services. And soon my father closed his practice. No Marylander should have to rely on the generosity of a doctor or the availability in an emergency department to get access to affordable quality care. And I believe that firmly, and that's why for the last 16 years, 8 in the General Assembly and 8 as your Lieutenant Governor, I've dedicated myself to expanding access to affordable quality health care to more and more Marylanders. And that's what I'm going to continue doing for as long as I have an opportunity to serve you in office.
Now, before we get to your closing statement, you did say that you wanted the opportunity to have a jobs-related question, specifically creating jobs. Now, Baltimore has certainly had its fair share of struggles on that front, and a lot of people have tried to turn that around. As governor, what would you do to create jobs in Baltimore?
If we're going to grow our economy, create jobs, develop the most competitive workforce in America, and develop Maryland businesses, we're going to have to position Maryland to be the most competitive business climate state in the nation. And I believe that we can do that without sacrificing our commitment to the environment, our commitment to consumers, our commitment to the workforce. But we can, as the Greater Baltimore Committee published in its report last summer, enter into a partnership, public sector and private sector, and identify those metrics that if we drive them, we will position Maryland to be the most competitive workforce. And when we do, the public sector has to step up and fulfill its responsibility, like delivering infrastructure. And whether it's the $1.1 billion for schools that not only put our kids in good schools, but create hundreds of construction jobs, or the $2.6 billion red line that creates jobs and opportunities, or like the $140 million investment at the Port of Baltimore that's created 5,000 jobs, and as you read last year, Amazon is bringing a fulfillment center, 1,600 jobs with the likelihood of a few hundred more to follow because of the investments that we make in infrastructure. But infrastructure is more than roads, rails, and ports. It's affordable housing. It's broadband, it's schools, it's hospitals, it's libraries. Those are the investments that create opportunities. Those are the investments that create jobs. Those are the investments for the future that we need to make today. Investments in infrastructure will be a high priority, and Maryland is well positioned to do it. We're one of only a handful of states with a AAA bond rating, which means that we can borrow responsibly with in-debt affordability at a low interest rate to deliver the infrastructure that supports growing economies here in Baltimore and around the state and expanding communities. So infrastructure is one, and if you gave me 20 minutes, I'd run through the next 8.
Well, I've already kept you here longer than I said I would, so I think the 20 minutes might have to wait till maybe in the future. Would you come back?
Absolutely.
Delegate George? We got 2 commitments already, so you people put it on your calendars now. But I've tried to tee everybody up for a closing statement, and hopefully that was a good lead-in for you. So at this time, you have 2 minutes, and the audience is yours.
Great, and I may not even take 2 minutes, but first of all, let me thank each and every one of you for coming out this evening. Your interest in Maryland's future and its future leadership. I've had the privilege, and I'm grateful to have been able to serve the last 8 years as your Lieutenant Governor. And together we, and I say we in the broadest sense of the word, whether you're a business owner or an academia, whether you're a public servant, a professional in law, medicine, engineering, or any number of other professions. Maryland is a great state because of what we do together. We've got one of the strongest economies in the nation. We've driven unemployment down to 5.6%, which is 20% below the national average. And yes, we have work to do, because as the question suggested, we still have too many Marylanders who are unemployed or underemployed or facing foreclosure. But our economy is strong and it's growing. We've got the best in the nation public schools, but as I've tried to address in my remarks this evening, we've got work to do until every student, every child has access to a world-class education. We've made college more affordable to more and more by holding tuition flat. We're finally making progress in cleaning the Bay with fewer and fewer dead zones in its tributaries, a rebound of the blue crab population. And as your next governor, I want to broaden the environmental coalition as we take on more and more of the environmental issues that we face and encounter in our urban centers. Maryland's a great state, but I'm running because, like you, I believe that Maryland can be better. We'll be better not by cutting down Maryland, but by building on our successes, acknowledging where we've had shortcomings, but agreeing to come together to find the common ground, to drive this state in the right direction on behalf of all Marylanders. Our greatest challenge, perhaps, as we continue to improve Maryland, is to address the disparities, the gaps, and inequities that exist in our economy, our classrooms, and our society. We can do that together when we build on our successes for a better Maryland, for more Marylanders. Thank you very much, and I need your vote on June 24th.
Thank you. I'm not going to take anybody else's time, so thank you all for coming out, genuinely.